property basics. The Bergin Hunt and Fish Club was located in Ozone Park, Queens, New York City at 9804 101st Avenue. It was not a private mansion, but a low-profile street-level property described as 2 brick storefronts that were internally connected, the kind of place that could disappear into the visual noise of a working-class commercial strip. The exact square footage is not consistently published in accessible public summaries, but contemporary descriptions emphasize how compact and utilitarian it was, with a front office area, a back area used for cooking and socializing, and a general layout designed more for control and privacy than comfort. In later years, the original club space was subdivided and repurposed for legitimate businesses, and reporting describes it as being split into 2 separate storefronts. Its current market value as a standalone mob landmark is not treated like a normal celebrity home listing because the building has been altered and is part of a dense urban streetscape rather than a singular estate. Architecturally, the notable features were not luxury elements but defensive ones described in period reporting, including heavy doors, limited visibility from the street, and window treatments that discouraged prying eyes. The status today is that the Mob Social Club no longer operates as such, and the space has long been converted into ordinary retail uses. The criminal owner, John Joseph Gotti, commonly called John Gotti and known publicly as the Dapper Don and the Teflon Don, was a leading figure in the Gambino crime family. He was born October 27, 1940, and died June 10, 2002, while serving a life sentence in federal prison. His criminal career was rooted in the American Mafia's traditional rackets: loan sharking, illegal gambling, hijacking and theft from cargo and trucking streams, labor racketeering, and violent enforcement, including involvement in conspiracies and murders attributed to organized crime power struggles. His ascension to boss followed the assassination of Gambino boss Paul Castellano on December 16, 1985, an event widely treated as the hinge moment that made Gotti a national obsession and a top law enforcement target. His inner circle included underboss Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano and close associate Frank Locascio during the period when federal investigators finally captured enough recorded conversations to build a racketeering case. His eventual fate was conviction in 1992 and a life sentence, followed by death in prison in 2002. Public estimates of his personal wealth vary widely depending on whether you treat wealth as personal net worth, annual earnings, or control over criminal revenue streams, and serious accounts often lean on trial testimony and investigative estimates of yearly income rather than a clean Forbes-style net worth number. The property's history. The Bergin Hunt and Fish Club's deeper story begins before Gotti is a household name, when the club functioned as a Queens base tied to the Gambino crew environment associated with Carmine Fatico, and later became closely associated with Gotti's orbit as he rose. It served as a day-to-day operational hub rather than a home, and multiple accounts describe it as the kind of place where money disputes, street-level rackets, and internal discipline were handled behind a locked door. In the Gotti era, it was treated as a neighborhood clubhouse and a power node, with food, card games, and a constant hum of visitors who understood exactly what the place was, even if the name on the sign suggested outdoorsmanship. Reporting and later recollections also emphasize how the club projected a kind of community presence through public-facing neighborhood gestures like holiday events, a contrast to the threat that the same location represented to debtors, rivals, and anyone under suspicion. Dramatic incidents. The Bergin is repeatedly tied to electronic surveillance and law enforcement pressure, not because it was a glamorous raid site with piles of gold, but because it was a place where words mattered and words could be captured. There's also a documented law enforcement focus on the broader ecosystem of Ozone Park and related Gambino meeting sites, with informant reporting describing armed enforcers outside the club while Gotti was inside at certain times. In federal court material tied to Gotti-era prosecutions, informants described seeing approximately 20 armed men outside the Bergin while Gotti was inside, a detail that speaks to how the sidewalk itself became a controlled perimeter. The club's importance is also reinforced by accounts that it was an early place where Gotti was caught on intercepted communications connected to gambling and other rackets, and it is remembered as a location where surveillance and recording contributed to the government's long effort to put him away. Secret features and luxury. The secrets of the Bergin are urban and practical rather than cinematic tunnels. The most consistent descriptions focus on how it was visually sealed from the street, how access was controlled at the door, and how interior routines were designed to make outsiders feel immediately unwelcome. In later reporting, describing the club's partial conversion, details emerge about what used to be inside, including a desk that functioned as a front office point, and a barber chair that law enforcement considered a useful placement location for listening devices, because it anchored people in one spot while they talked. There are descriptions of paneled walls, a bar, card tables, and a back kitchen used for meals. This is not a palace, but a workplace for intimidation and commerce, and that is exactly why it became valuable. Seizure or aftermath. Public reporting from later years emphasizes that the club ceased to exist in its classic form and was carved up into ordinary retail. By 2000, reporting described the club being sliced in half to make room for a butcher shop, described how features associated with the old social club had disappeared, including that front office setup and the well-known barber chair. By 2008, reporting described the former club address as housing two separate businesses. The transformation itself is part of the aftermath. The underworld aura stripped out, replaced by fluorescent lit commerce, while the legend lingered in neighborhood memory. Financial trail. Unlike sprawling narco estates with shell company title puzzles, the Bergin story that is most verifiable in accessible sources is less about a complicated property ownership scheme, and more about its use as a racketeering venue, and about law enforcement's legal strategies to seize assets and tie physical places to enterprise activity. There were government efforts in the early 1990s to pursue forfeiture of locations tied to Gotti's operations, and press coverage at the time framed social clubs as targets because they were operational headquarters. However, the clean, specific purchase price and date for the Bergin property in the way you might track a mansion sale is not reliably presented in the material I retrieved, and I will not invent it. Human stories. The human texture around the Bergin comes from the way locals talked about it afterward, and from how reporters described the atmosphere when the club's presence still hung over the block. People described the era as one where certain forms of street crime felt discouraged in the immediate orbit of these men, while other kinds of violence and disappearance were very real, including neighborhood fear, in the sense that some subjects were not safe to discuss out loud. In reporting from years after Gotti's reign, a business owner's silence in the former space is itself treated as a kind of living residue, and a waitress's recollection of mob-era social life is framed through pop-cultural comparisons that show how the myth and the daily reality blurred together. Cultural impact. The Bergin Hunt and Fish Club has become a kind of true crime pilgrimage stop, the way the Ravenite is for Little Italy, except the Bergin is more suburban Queens than Manhattan theater. It appears frequently in mob history discussions, walking tour write-ups, and photo archives, and it lives on as a symbol of how organized crime embedded itself into ordinary storefront architecture. It also sits in the shadow of Gotti's broader media mythology, where his image is constantly recycled through documentaries, dramatizations, and endless commentary about how surveillance finally made the Teflon Don stick. Visual elements. There are widely available exterior photographs of the storefront from the period of Gotti's fame and from later years, including press images of the block and photos of tributes left outside after major events, and later images showing its conversion into new storefront businesses. There's also street view and neighborhood photography that shows how unremarkable the building looks when you strip away the story, which is part of the eerie appeal. You can stand on a Queens sidewalk and look at a normal commercial facade, and know it once functioned as an unofficial corporate office for a criminal enterprise. On a warm summer night in Queens, the kind of night when the air still feels sticky after sunset, and the streetlights turn every parked windshield into a dull orange mirror, a small group of men stands outside a pair of brick storefronts on 101st Avenue in Ozone Park. You can hear traffic a block away, you can hear distant television through somebody's open window, you can smell gasoline and pizza and the faint sourness of trash that hasn't been collected yet. And you can feel it, that strange pressure that forms around certain places, where the sidewalk itself seems to belong to someone. The men outside don't look like soldiers in a war zone, but they move like a perimeter. They don't smile at strangers. They don't drift. They hold their space with the quiet certainty of people who expect obedience without asking for it. A car slows as it passes, the headlights sweep across their faces, and the car keeps moving without stopping, as if the driver knows better than to look too long. Inside, the lights are low. The room smells like coffee that's been reheated too many times, fried onions from a back kitchen, cigarette smoke, ground into wood paneling, and cologne that tries to cover the rest and fails. A cheap bar stands at one end, not for cocktails, but for presence, for a place to lean and talk and keep a glass in your hand while you decide someone's future. Against one wall, there's a card table, or at least the memory of one, a space where money changes hands in neat stacks and in casual jokes that aren't really jokes at all. And somewhere in this dark, ordinary storefront in the middle of a neighborhood that still has families eating dinner and kids riding bikes, John Gotti is inside. And the people outside the door are not there for decoration. They are there because the man inside is the kind of man whose words can start an argument, end a life, or move a river of cash. And because everybody knows that a place like this is not just a hangout. It's a headquarters. It's an office. It's a courtroom with no judge. It's a bank with no paper trail. It's a temple where loyalty is worshipped and betrayal is punished. And if you've ever wondered how an American mafia boss could sit in plain sight for years, surrounded by streets and stores and everyday life, while building an empire that reached into unions, construction sites, cargo yards, and courtrooms, it starts here, in a storefront that pretends to be nothing at all. The Bergin Hunt and Fish Club never looked like what people imagine when they hear the words mob headquarters. No marble stairs, no wrought iron gates, no chandeliers. Just two connected brick storefronts at 9804 101st Avenue, with a name that sounds like outdoorsmen swapping stories about deer season and striped bass. But the name was camouflage, and the building was a machine. It did one thing extremely well. It gave power a place to sit down. It gave fear a place to gather. It gave men who lived by rules they never wrote a place to enforce them. And for a long stretch of time, if you wanted to find the pulse of John Gotti's Queens world, you didn't go to a mansion on a hill. You went to a modest block in Ozone Park, and you watched a door. Picture it in the years when Gotti's name begins to travel beyond the neighborhood. Queens in those days is not the sleek, branded borough people sell in real estate ads now. It's a patchwork of tight blocks, small businesses, modest houses, and family routines that run like clockwork. Men leave for work early. Kids pile into school buses. Women push strollers past diners and laundromats. In the middle of all that ordinary movement, the Bergin sits like a stone. The windows don't invite you in. The front doesn't advertise comfort. The place isn't trying to look fun. It's trying to look like you don't belong there. Unless you're supposed to. You might think that kind of place would attract attention, but the opposite is true. In a city full of noise, the quietest places can be the most dangerous. The Bergin didn't need a neon sign. It didn't need a crowd. It needed control. A good social club in that world isn't about hospitality. It's about predictability. People arrive when they're told. They sit where they're told. They keep their voices low. They don't ask the wrong questions. And when a man like Gotti is inside, the entire building becomes an extension of him. The walls hold his conversations. The doorway filters his visitors. The sidewalk becomes his early warning system. John Gotti, the man the press would later dress up as a kind of outlaw celebrity, doesn't begin as a celebrity at all. He begins as something much more common and much more brutal. A neighborhood kid who learns early that respect can be taken faster than it can be earned, and that fear is a currency that never devalues. He grows up in New York's working-class world, surrounded by people who live close enough together to know each other's business and poor enough to understand the lure of fast money. The Mafia, in that environment, isn't a movie. It's a presence. It's a rumor you hear in a barbershop. It's the guy who never seems to have a real job, but always has cash. It's the man who walks into a place and people make room without being asked. Gotti's path into organized crime is not a single dramatic leap. It's a series of choices that narrow his life until only one road feels open. Theft becomes routine. Violence becomes language. Loyalty becomes the only insurance policy. In that ecosystem, a social club like the Bergin is more than a hangout. It's a training ground. It's where younger guys learn how the hierarchy works by watching who gets greeted and who gets ignored. It's where they learn how to speak without saying too much. It's where they learn that being seen with the right people can make you, and being seen with the wrong people can end you. The Bergin's practical genius is that it sits at street level, close to major roads and close to the kind of infrastructure that feeds criminal rackets in New York. Cargo moves through the city like blood through arteries. Trucks roll to and from airports, ports, warehouses, and markets. Unions control labor. Labor controls schedules. Schedules control money. And money, in organized crime, is rarely about one big score. It's about the daily harvest, the steady cut, the weekly envelope, the monthly payoff. The Bergin is the place where those flows are discussed, enforced, punished, and protected. It's not a palace because it doesn't need to be. It needs to be functional. It needs to be familiar. It needs to be close enough for the right people to stop by without thinking, and intimidating enough that the wrong people won't. For years, law enforcement circles the Mafia like hunters circling a hidden animal. They watch, they listen, they cultivate informants, they take photographs, they build charts with names and arrows and titles. But the Mafia's great advantage is not just secrecy, it's culture. These men grow up learning how not to talk. They learn to treat phones like traps. They learn to use silence as armor. And they learn that their safest conversations happen in rooms they control with people they trust in places like the Bergin. That is why, for investigators, the Bergin is not just an address. It's a problem. It's the kind of place where the truth might finally be spoken out loud, and where capturing that truth becomes a war of inches. There is a moment in every major organized crime story when the mythology starts to crack, when the public image and the internal reality collide. For John Gotti, one of those collisions comes with his rise into the highest tier of the Gambino crime family after the assassination of Paul Castellano in December of 1985. When Castellano is killed, it sends a message that reshapes the entire landscape. It says the old order can be overthrown. It says ambition has teeth. It says the throne is not protected by tradition alone. And in the wake of that assassination, the eyes of law enforcement sharpen, the pressure increases, the surveillance intensifies. And the people closest to Gotti begin to understand something they don't say out loud. Being close to him now is dangerous in a new way, because he is no longer just a powerful man. He is the man. When you become the boss, you don't just gain power, you gain gravity. People orbit you. They seek your approval. They fear your displeasure. They bring you problems because only you can solve them. They bring you money because only you can distribute it. They bring you rumors because only you can decide what they mean. And you need places to handle all of that. Places where you can meet captains and soldiers and associates. Places where you can listen to complaints. Places where you can decide who gets rewarded and who gets wrecked. The Bergin becomes one of those places. It is a Queen's anchor point for a man whose influence spreads across New York, but whose identity remains deeply tied to neighborhoods like Ozone Park and nearby Howard Beach. From the outside, nothing changes. That's the point. From the outside, it's still a storefront with a name that doesn't match what happens inside. But the energy changes. The way men act changes. The way they greet each other changes. There's more deference, more caution, more attention paid to who is watching. Even the street seems to understand. Cars slow and move on. People cross the street without knowing exactly why. Some neighbors feel a strange sense of safety, the feeling that petty criminals won't operate too close to a place like that, because a different kind of criminal already owns the block. But that safety comes with a price. It's the safety of living under a shadow. It's the safety of knowing the people who can hurt you are also the people who might hurt someone else first. Inside the Bergin, the day can unfold in a rhythm that looks almost boring, until you understand what's being decided. A man comes in with a problem. A debtor hasn't paid. Someone has been shorting the weekly envelope. A union job isn't moving the way it should. A hijacking crew took a truck they weren't supposed to take, or took it at the wrong time, or took it from the wrong person. Somebody's mouth is too loose. Somebody's loyalty is questionable. Somebody's ambition is showing. In any normal business office, these are HR issues and accounting disputes. In this office, they are matters of violence. Gotti's public image later becomes all expensive suits and headlines and swagger. But inside places like the Bergin, the work is not glamorous. It's repetitive. It's managerial. It's emotional labor of the darkest kind. It's keeping men in line who are not naturally obedient. It's distributing spoils without creating resentment. It's punishing defiance without creating rebellion. And it's doing all of this while law enforcement is trying to turn the very rooms where you speak into a weapon against you. Electronic surveillance becomes the obsession of both sides. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and other agencies understand that racketeering cases are built with language. They need words. They need recorded conversations that show hierarchy, decisions, profits, and crimes. Without that, they have fragments. A beating here, a hijacking there, a witness who disappears, a victim who suddenly can't remember. They need the boss's voice, or at least the boss's presence, proved through conversations that establish control. The problem is that Gotti, like many experienced Mafia figures, treats telephones as poison. He expects taps. He expects bugs. He expects betrayal. He and his crew develop habits to avoid being pinned down by recorded words. They meet face to face. They walk and talk outside, using the city itself as a moving barrier against microphones. They change meeting spots. They keep conversations vague, using nicknames and half sentences that only insiders understand. And in clubs like the Bergin, they create an atmosphere where everyone assumes the place is watched, which paradoxically makes it harder to catch them saying anything clean enough for court. And yet, even with all that caution, the Bergin becomes associated with early wiretaps and bugs connected to criminal rackets. That doesn't mean the place was always successfully penetrated or that every recording was clear. It means the building was a target, a battlefield, and both sides treated it that way. In the Mafia's world, a room is never just a room. It is either controlled by you, or it is potentially controlled by someone else. In law enforcement's world, the same logic applies. A room is either silent, or it can be turned into evidence. The most chilling thing about a headquarters like the Bergin is how ordinary it can feel when nothing dramatic is happening. Men sit, drink coffee, play cards, talk about sports, laugh, complain, eat. There is warmth in the room, in a way. There are jokes, stories, the familiar comfort of a place where everyone knows the same rules. It can feel like family, but the warmth is conditional. It's warmth under authority. It's warmth with an edge. Everyone understands that behind the casual talk is a constant calculation. Who is trusted, who is rising, who is falling, who is being watched, who might be cooperating, who might be lying. Consider the simple fact of a door. In a normal storefront, a door is a welcome. In the Bergin, the door is a test. Who knocks? Who gets let in? Who waits? Who is turned away? Who is searched with a glance? Who gets greeted with affection and who gets greeted with suspicion? That door decides who belongs in the inner circle and who belongs outside in the cold. And it also decides what law enforcement sees. Because every time someone walks in, someone could be watching from a car, a building, a street corner. Every time someone walks out, someone could be photographed. And in organized crime investigations, those photographs become their own kind of map, a record of who is connected to whom. In New York, organized crime has always been entangled with a kind of neighborhood theater. The Mafia wants to be feared, but it also wants to be accepted. It wants to be invisible to outsiders, but it also wants to be recognized by insiders. A club like the Bergin has to balance those needs. Too flashy, and you attract law enforcement and rivals. Too quiet, and you lose the aura that keeps people obedient. So the Bergin becomes a place that is known without being advertised. People in the neighborhood know what it is, even if they never say it out loud. People who do business with the Mafia know where to go when they have to pay respect. People who owe money know that the club is a physical location where their debt becomes real. And then there are the human moments that expose the cost. The neighbor who doesn't come home, the witness who changes his story, the person who refuses police protection because the presence of police feels like an even bigger target, the business owner who chooses silence when asked about the past because silence is safer than memory. These moments are what turn a building into a haunted place, even when the building itself looks like any other storefront. At the height of Gotti's influence, the Bergin is part of a broader constellation of social clubs and meeting places that the Gambino world uses. Each location has its purpose. Some are for public visibility. Some are for private decisions. Some are for certain crews, certain loyalties, certain rituals. The Bergin's particular identity is Queens, and Queens means something in Gotti's story. It means roots. It means neighborhood loyalty. It means the kind of local power that feels almost old-fashioned, like a political machine, except the votes are replaced by cash and the campaign speeches are replaced by threats. There is an image people carry of John Gotti as the man who loved the spotlight, the man who fed the media's hunger. That image has truth in it, but it is incomplete. The real machinery of his power is not the camera flash. It's the meeting. It's the quiet conversation. It's the moment when a man leans in at a table and realizes his life has become negotiable. It's the moment when someone is told to do something they don't want to do, and they do it anyway because they understand the alternative. The Bergin is built for those moments. Now imagine law enforcement year after year trying to crack that machinery. Investigators know that the key to organized crime is not just catching a soldier committing a crime. Soldiers can be replaced. They need the structure. They need the chain of command. They need to show that the boss is not just a guy who knows criminals, but a man who directs, profits, and controls. And the only way to do that, in many cases, is to make the boss speak in a way that can be played back in a courtroom. That's why the idea of a bug becomes so powerful. The concept is simple and almost poetic in its cruelty. While the Mafia builds rooms for secrecy, law enforcement tries to turn those rooms into traps. A microphone in the right place can capture arrogance, cruelty, plotting, confession. It can capture the boss, talking like a boss, but getting that microphone into place is a nightmare. You need access, you need timing, you need luck, you need a window when the place is empty. You need people who can enter without being seen, install equipment, and leave without leaving a trace. You need a black bag operation, the kind of covert entry that becomes its own high-stakes crime story. Even when you succeed, the room fights you. Noise ruins recordings. An espresso machine hisses, a soda machine rattles, multiple conversations overlap, a chair scrapes, a door slams, a cough interrupts the one sentence you needed. And the men inside are not stupid. They learn to talk in fragments. They learn to speak in code. They learn to say that thing instead of naming the thing. They learn to talk about a problem instead of describing the crime. They learn to joke when they're angry and whisper when they're serious. And still, the pressure builds, and the Bergin remains a focal point because it is exactly the kind of place where a boss might feel safe enough to let his guard down. It's not a courthouse. It's not a police station. It's not even a restaurant full of strangers. It's his place, his people, his neighborhood, his rules. And that sense of ownership can be fatal. There are details about the Bergin that tell you how intensely the place was shaped by suspicion. The windows are treated like vulnerabilities. The door is treated like a checkpoint. The interior is treated like a controlled environment. A barber chair becomes not just a piece of furniture, but an anchor point, a place where a man sits and talks, where his head is still and his voice is predictable. A desk in a front office becomes not just a desk, but a command post, a place where you can position yourself in the room and keep an eye on who enters and who leaves. A kitchen in the back becomes not just a kitchen, but a ritual space, where shared meals bind men together and create the sense of community that makes loyalty feel natural. And then, because this is New York and this is the Mafia, the club also becomes part of neighborhood mythology. People talk about fireworks on the 4th of July, about barbecues, about food, about a kind of street-level generosity that feels contradictory in the face of violence. But that contradiction is the essence of organized crime's relationship to certain communities. It offers protection and fear in the same package. It offers charity and extortion from the same hand. It offers the illusion of order while feeding on disorder. If you stand outside the Bergin in your mind's eye, you can almost see how it worked without needing to witness the crimes directly. You see the men who arrive and linger. You see the cars that idle and move on. You see the way some people avoid eye contact, the way others nod respectfully. You see the pattern of the day, morning quiet, afternoon visits, evening gatherings. You see a man entering who looks nervous, who comes in alone, who leaves quickly as if he has done what he needed to do and wants to disappear back into normal life as fast as possible. You see another man arriving with confidence, greeted warmly, someone whose status is known. You see the difference between someone who belongs and someone who is tolerated. Inside, the conversations can be banal on the surface and terrifying underneath. A discussion about money can be a discussion about who gets hurt. A joke about someone's attitude can be a warning. A complaint about a delay can be the beginning of an execution order. And because the Mafia is hierarchical, the most dangerous part of the conversation is often the quiet part, the moment when everyone waits to see what the boss will say. John Gotti's reputation for temper, for theatrical anger, for sharp words that cut like knives becomes part of his internal management style. In a world where everyone wants to appear strong, public humiliation can be a weapon. If the boss dresses you down in front of others, your status suffers. If your status suffers, your ability to earn suffers. If your ability to earn suffers, your survival suffers. That's how a man can control other violent men without constantly resorting to physical violence. He can use shame, fear, and economic pressure. The Bergin becomes a stage for that kind of control, even when it looks like nothing more than a smoky room behind a locked door. And then the outside world pushes in. Investigations expand, informants talk, prosecutors build cases. And the deeper law enforcement gets, the more the Mafia tightens its circle. Paranoia becomes a daily condition. Men start looking at each other differently. Someone who is late is suspicious. Someone who is too quiet is suspicious. Someone who suddenly has money problems is suspicious. Someone who asks too many questions is suspicious. Someone who doesn't ask enough questions is suspicious. In that atmosphere, a headquarters like the Bergin can become both a sanctuary and a pressure cooker. There is a particular kind of dread that comes with the idea that the place you trust most might be compromised. If you're a Mafia boss, you live with the fear of betrayal as a constant. Betrayal is not an abstract concept. It is a career hazard. It is a death sentence. It is also eventually the thing that brings down empires. When law enforcement finally succeeds against a figure like Gotti, it's usually not because they suddenly became smarter overnight. It's because the system around him finally fractures. Someone talks, someone cooperates, someone decides survival is more important than loyalty. And when that happens, every room becomes dangerous. Every conversation becomes evidence. The Bergin story is not one single raid with a battering ram and a dramatic arrest on a staircase. It's something slower and, in some ways, more haunting. It's a story about a place that serves as an anchor for criminal governance, and about how law enforcement tries to turn the very normality of that place into a weakness. Surveillance is patient. It accumulates. It builds. Photos become patterns. Patterns become charts. Charts become indictments. And indictments become the kind of pressure that makes men flip. At the same time, the Mafia tries to project confidence. It wants to look untouchable. Gotti, in particular, becomes known for surviving legal trouble and walking out of court with a grin, earning the nickname Teflon Don, because charges seem not to stick. That public narrative is intoxicating, and it feeds his legend. But legends are fragile. They rely on the illusion that the man is always in control. Inside the Bergin, in the private world where the cameras don't go, control is more complicated. Control has to be maintained every day, and every day the risk grows. One of the most revealing truths about the Bergin is that it didn't have to be luxurious to be powerful. In fact, luxury would have been a mistake. Luxury draws eyes. Luxury invites envy. Luxury creates a sense of distance from the neighborhood that can weaken a boss's local authority. A storefront is different. A storefront is accessible. It's part of the block. It's part of the daily rhythm. It says, I am here. I am not hiding in a castle. I am among you. That can be a form of dominance. It tells the neighborhood that power is not somewhere far away. Power is right here, behind this door. And yet, time erodes even the most feared places. People go to prison. People die. Crews change. Neighborhoods change. The ethnic composition of blocks shifts. The younger generation doesn't carry the same reverence for old names. Some people who move into the area have no idea what the Bergin used to be. Others know and don't care. Others know and treat it like a weird piece of history, like a local ghost story. The building remains, but the world around it transforms, and eventually the club's grip weakens. There comes a point when the Bergin is no longer what it was. The details of that transition matter because they show how criminal power can evaporate in the most mundane ways. Not with a firefight, not with an explosion, but with construction and paperwork and new signage. At some point, the space that once functioned as a headquarters gets cut, subdivided, repurposed. The very fact that it can be turned into ordinary retail is a kind of defeat. It means the aura has faded enough that the block can reclaim the square footage. Imagine what it feels like for someone who knew the old Bergin to walk by and see a clear glass door, bright lights, normal customers. Imagine standing on the same sidewalk where men once held the line like soldiers, And now seeing people stroll in without fear, asking about prices, paying with credit cards, chatting casually. That transformation is more than real estate. It is the physical proof that power is temporary, even when it feels eternal. But the past doesn't vanish cleanly. Even after the club is altered, the memory remains. People who lived through the era remember the sense of tension. They remember the feeling that certain topics weren't safe. They remember the way certain men were treated with deference. They remember the block parties and fireworks and the strange mixture of community and menace. They remember, too, the darker stories, the disappearances, the rumors, the way people avoided talking to police even when police asked reasonable questions. They remember that living near a place like the Bergin meant living near a kind of unofficial government. The Bergin is also a reminder that organized crime, at its most effective, doesn't look like chaos. It looks like administration. It looks like men sitting down, making decisions, enforcing policies. It looks like a business with no invoices. And that is what makes it so difficult to fight. Because the Mafia doesn't always announce itself with violence. Often, it announces itself with compliance, with the way people pay without being asked twice, with the way businesses accept certain arrangements, with the way a man's problem gets solved, and everyone knows not to ask how. When John Gotti's empire finally collapses in the early 1990s, it is the culmination of pressure that has been building for years, and it is fueled by the thing every Mafia boss fears most: insiders turning into witnesses. The courtroom becomes the place where the private world gets exposed, where the spoken words, the jokes, the complaints, the orders are ripped from their context and played back as evidence. The boss who once relied on loyalty finds himself surrounded by the sound of his own voice, captured and framed by the government. And the legend of being untouchable dies in the most humiliating way possible. Not with a bullet, but with a verdict. From the perspective of the Bergin, this downfall is not a single day. It's a slow draining of the building's purpose. As the leadership goes down, as key figures disappear into prison or death, the club's role changes. It becomes less a headquarters and more a relic. The meetings become less important. The visitors become different. The air changes. The energy that once made people cross the street starts to fade, replaced by the blunt reality that the men who controlled the block are no longer there in the same way. And then, eventually, the practical world takes over. Landlords make decisions. Businesses expand. Spaces get renovated. A building that once held secrets gets repainted. Walls that once absorbed whispered threats get covered in new colors. The places where people sat become places where customers stand. The transformation is quiet. There is no ceremony for the end of an era. There is just the passage of time and the replacement of one kind of commerce with another. Still, the legend of the Bergin survives because it represents something specific in American criminal history. The way a storefront can be an empire. The way a brick building in Queens can become a command center for rackets that reach across a city. The way a man like Gotti could project power from a place that looks, to an outsider, like nothing special at all. The Bergin becomes a symbol of the Mafia's genius for hiding in plain sight. You can walk through Ozone Park today and see a neighborhood living its life, and that is perhaps the most unsettling part. The same streets that once held that tension now hold ordinary routines. Kids still ride bikes. People still go to diners. Cars still idle at red lights. The building that once housed a feared social club can hold ordinary businesses. The city absorbs its own darkness and keeps moving. The past is not erased, but it is layered over like paint over old paneling. And that raises the question that makes the Bergin story more than just a mob anecdote. What does it mean that such power could exist so openly, so locally, for so long? What does it say about the way communities adapt to fear, sometimes even romanticize it, sometimes accept it as a fact of life? What does it say about how law enforcement has to fight not just criminals, but a culture of silence, a web of loyalties, and a system of informal governance? The Bergin Hunt and Fish Club is not famous because it was beautiful. It is famous because it was effective. It was a place where men who dealt in intimidation and cash and violence could gather, feel safe, and run their world. It was a modest building that held enormous influence, the kind of influence that doesn't show up in property listings, but shows up in the way people behave. In that sense, the Bergin is a perfect emblem of the American Mafia at its peak, hidden in plain sight, woven into the fabric of the neighborhood, operating out of storefronts and back rooms, using ordinary architecture as camouflage for extraordinary crimes. And when you return to that opening image, the men outside the door on a summer night, holding the sidewalk like it belongs to them, the meaning becomes clearer. The real luxury was never gold fixtures or mansions. The real luxury was control. The luxury was being able to sit in a storefront in Queens and have the city bend around you. The luxury was being able to speak and have others obey. The luxury was being able to create a world inside a small brick building where the laws outside didn't apply. But the same thing that makes a place like the Bergin powerful also makes it vulnerable. Because it's fixed. It's an address. It's a routine. It's a pattern law enforcement can study. It's a doorway people pass through again and again until the government knows their faces, their cars, their habits. It's a room where voices eventually get captured. If not today, then tomorrow. If not by one method, then by another. If not by technology, then by betrayal. A headquarters is a throne, but it's also a target. In the end, the Bergin doesn't fall with sirens and gunfire. It falls the way so many criminal landmarks fall. By losing the people who made it matter. By becoming just another piece of New York real estate. By being cut up and repainted and repurposed until the only thing left is the story. And maybe that is the final irony. A place built for secrecy becomes famous. A place built to intimidate becomes a curiosity. A place that once felt untouchable becomes just a storefront again. So if you ever find yourself imagining that the Mafia lived in a world of hidden palaces and cinematic glamour, remember this instead. Remember 2 connected brick storefronts on 101st Avenue in Ozone Park. Remember a door that decided who belonged. Remember the men outside who held the sidewalk. Remember the smell of coffee and smoke and fried food in a room where millions of dollars could be decided with a few low sentences. And remember that history's most dangerous rooms are not always the ones that look dangerous. Sometimes they look like nothing at all, until you understand what happened inside.